This is Open Source Tonight for January the 1st, 2020, a new decade for Linux and open source software. And as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Billy Everso.
Hello, everybody. How's it going for this new year?
Billy, how was your New Year celebration going?
It was flop. We tried to watch the news for the ball drop in New York, and they didn't show it, which was terrible. Well, other than that, I had a good night.
Well, there you go. So that... Go ahead.
What about yourself?
It was good. I did a New Year's live broadcast on this internet thing. I think it's going to take off in a few years. You should check it out. But that's what I did. I did a broadcast on there, and it was really cool. So
sounds cool.
Yeah, me and my friend Carmen did that. So check that out. We'll put a link in the show notes description if anybody wants to go and look at that. That's about 2.5 hours of pure boredom or interest, depending on your opinion of the program. Anyway, so this new decade, what's going to bring this new decade for Linux and open source software? And the real answer, are you ready for this, Billy?
Yep.
The real answer is a lot. I mean, technically that is correct. Technically, that is correct.
True. Since this year has just started, there's nothing in the news, so we should just tell our predictions of what we expect.
Okay, well, I'll go first then, I guess. I am show host and the guy that talks a lot. Ever so in my headphones says I expect everything. So anyway, his mic's kind of bad, so I have him muted, but I have him in my headphones in case he says something, so I can repeat it. And then I unmute him when I think he's going to talk. So that's what happens when you have a bad mic. But anyway, then at the point. Today, folks, we're entering a new decade, right? This is episode 1 of a brand new decade. Now, here's one of the things I think is going to happen in the next decade, and really probably pretty early on in it. And maybe I'll be wrong. I'm not exactly the best person when it comes to predictions, so that disclaimer out of the way. First prediction, Ubuntu will be bought by Microsoft Corporation Inc. of America. I don't even know if that's their actual operating name, but we're going to just pretend it is. Microsoft's going to buy them. I think Microsoft is going to buy Ubuntu specifically for a very dirt simple reason. They're kind of similar from a company structure standpoint, and they use a lot of Ubuntu stuff. They really have cozied up to Ubuntu. Linux is a large part of their software offerings on Azure cloud services, which makes a bulk of their money these days for them. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So I think I could see them totally going to Ubuntu and trying to get Canonical to basically sell them either Ubuntu itself or possibly them just buying Canonical entirely as an acquisition. But either way, I definitely can see Microsoft doing that. And also, I'm just trying to get over a cold. And Billy pops in at random with his mic off and says, I can see it as well. So, sorry, Billy, but warning, please.
I agree with you on your prediction.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Billy. So anyway, Billy, he agrees with me, which is a comforting thought to people that want him to agree with me, I guess. Another big thing I think that's going to be a big deal in the years to come, video production on Linux is getting better and better all the time, and I'm really hopeful, because I do video production on Linux, that it will get better and better into the 2020s, just like it has in the 2010s. In the early days of Linux, which I was not editing video on Linux in the early days, so I can't really say I have dealt with those hardships, but in the early days, it was really hard to edit video with any level of quality really that easily on Linux. It was hard to do live video on Linux. Linux has come a long way in the past decade when it comes to video production and games as well. So big congratulations to Linux for that. I know this is really more of a look back right here, but still. So, but anyway, that's the story on that. Now, another thing that I think is going to happen, and Billy, feel free to chime in on this, but I think another thing that's going to happen that's going to be a big deal is when it comes to the Linux world, I think that people are going to hopefully adjust to having more proprietary software on Linux because, look, I get it, open source is the preferred option, and I'm with you on that, but to get work done, sometimes you need an app that's proprietary for whatever the reason. If you're in business, sometimes a client requires you do it in this app, whatever it may be, right? You're working on some other company with it, whatever. So there is situations. So, when I can, like to use open source, but it would be nice to have the proprietary options available if that the need arises, not have to boot into a Windows virtual machine. So that's something I think that will hopefully change. That's really more of a hope than the thing I think that's actually going to happen. The Linux community in open source, we're very against proprietary, and I think it hurts us more than helps us, honestly. But that being said, I do think that things are going to be heading towards more software on Linux regardless. Now, another thing I think I can really bet on safely, knock on wood, is Electron Apps. going up on Linux versus the native apps. I'm sure there will still be native apps developed. That's probably never going to fully go away on any operating system. But I do think that Electron Apps, because they're cross-platform, because they give a central, if you will, API to everything, regardless whether you're on Mac, whether you're on Linux, whether you're on Windows, it's just going to make it easier on the developers. And developers, a lot of developers want to be able to target, I think I can speak for myself at least, all these systems, right? There's users on Mac that would be nice to target Windows and Linux. So Electron makes it easy to, if you will, to write once and not have to really deal with all the differences between the systems, because it kind of obscures that under a simple API that's going to be the same whether you're on Windows or Mac or Linux. Like notifications, for example, it's entirely different on a Linux system and on a Mac system. Right? It's entirely different. So it would be really great if we had an environment that was conducive to that, you know? So, Billy, what do you think about Electron Apps?
Yeah. I've never really actually used it before, but it sounds interesting.
I mean, I'll tell you right now, Billy, you definitely used an Electron app.
Remember, I'm still the noob.
I know, but I can tell you right now, this is what I'm trying to tell you. You have used an Electron app before. Have you ever used Discord?
I have.
You have? Okay. You've used an Electron app.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Have you ever used Skype? That's an Electron app.
Yeah.
So, have you ever used VS Code, the code editor? An Electron app. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of different Electron apps out there these days. So, betting that you have used one at some point is a pretty good bet. And I don't think that the number of them is going to go down. I think it's going to go up. Some people in the Linux community don't like Electron apps, and I understand why. There's definitely negatives to it. It's not native. Native apps are faster, more responsive, lighter weight. It's definitely, the better development structure from a purely usability standpoint. But at the end of the day, there is advantages to Electron. Like, for example, being able to customize the theming very heavily. Qt is pretty good for that, but GTK is not so much. These are different GUI toolkits that draws windows. And, at the end of the day, something like Electron, where everything is able to be very customized, that's something that developers want, that's something companies want, and so I don't think Electron is going away. Between the great API that developers can use, and I've wrote Electron apps, full disclosure, so I'm not speaking over things I don't actually know about, and then two, the other thing about Electron too is because that it's based on open standards, that's a really good thing too, right? I mean, HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript is what Electron is at the end of the day, which, if you're wondering, is the web stack. So basically, you're writing a web app that's not a web app and has access to everything a desktop app would have access to, but you write it like a web app. And that pretty much means any web developer out there that has decent skills in the web stack can magically start writing desktop apps, which, depending on your opinion, that's either a good or a bad thing. What do you think about that, Billy? Do you think web developers should be writing desktop apps?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, see, I mean, I don't really think it's a bad thing. I mean, I guess I'm biased because I like the web stack, and I don't really think web developers are bad developers, but, like, the thing for me is I do think that it's always good to have more people writing software. At the end of the day, I would love to see a world where everybody writes software. I mean, even if you don't have to, just having the skills is really powerful, right? Being able to, I need this application and nobody's got it. Being able to make it's great. On the other hand, though, I'm a software developer for contracts, so you know what? I changed my mind. Instead of learning how to be a software developer, contact me. No, I'm kidding. Maybe a little bit. Anyway, so I don't know. I think that Electron is not really too bad. I mean, do you mind using an Electron app? If you had the choice between an Electron app and a non-Electron app, what would you go for and why?
I'll just go for what purpose is needed.
You'd go for the best tool for the job. That's what you would go for.
Yeah.
So I mean, that makes sense.
I'll choose what is most needed. What's the best to use for the situation.
That makes total sense. And Electron, it gives you, a bigger choice because, and see, this is the reason I like Electron, because developers get to write once, you are going to be on the same code base as the Windows systems, as the Mac systems, right, on Linux. And I get it, it's slower, it takes up, more resources, but here's the thing. While it does do that, it's not that much more. We have pretty powerful machines these days in the Linux world and in the Windows world and the Mac world. So at this point, it doesn't really matter about using resources as much as it did, say, in the 90s or the 80s when we had computers that was barely fast enough to play a video game. So these days, optimizations, I mean, yeah, they still are important, but these days, an Electron app if it's optimized pretty good, actually it's not too bad. I've used some Electron apps that are pretty optimized, and they can be relatively lightweight. I mean, they're still heavier than a native app, but if the developer takes care to try to respect your resources as much as possible, they can definitely minimize it. One thing that I think that's really good to do, there's a way you can check to see if the app is like full, like actually like displaying, like that the view of the window is up. And if it's not, you can like minimize your system resources by disabling a lot of things. And then when the user brings the window back up, then they can, go ahead and turn that on. A good Electron app will do that, and that will drastically help out with resource usage, just that alone. So there's different things you can do in that aspect. So I think that Electron apps, for that reason, are really actually a good thing for Linux, because it will allow us to get apps, for one thing, that might never have been on Linux, because the developer's like, I don't think it's a big enough market. But if it's already in Electron, and all they have to do is build a binary that takes a few seconds to build, and they don't have to change any of the code, they're like, you know what? I mean, if it's that easy, might as well give them the app anyway. So that might get us some developers that otherwise might not develop for Linux, because it's like, well, it's that easy. Might as well just, throw out a Linux version 2 if it's going to be that simple, right? Even if you don't care for Linux. And obviously, people that do care about Linux, then that's going to be good for us, because that means there's going to be more choice. It also means things like, say, Skype and Discord, we're going to be using the same code base at the end of the day that the Windows users, that the Mac users are using. And those user bases, like it or not, are more cared about at the end of the day by companies like Microsoft and the Discord company and things like that. Sadly, that's just the way things are. Linux, being smaller in the market, is cared about less and will get software updated less if it's specifically just for Linux. But an Electron app, because it's a centralized code base that's shared between all those systems, when Windows gets an update, we will get an update. And because Windows is the bulk of the market share, we pretty much will be up to date with everybody else simultaneously. I mean, there is exceptions to that, but for the most part, it's that way. So I think that's a really good thing about that. And the other thing about Electron, too, if the open source people out there, are listening, I mean, it's a podcast about open source, so I would assume so. I would assume, get ready for this. Get ready for this. Electron's open source. It's open source. Get this. So think about this. At least the developers are building open source for the backend, right? There you go. That being said, their license does allow the app to be closed source, though. So, I think that's actually a good thing, because that means we can get proprietary vendors to hop over to Linux. But, I don't know. It's a mixed blessing, I guess. Any thoughts?
Not really, but it sounds awesome.
It sounds awesome. Well, there you go. The other things... Billy is still learning.
I'm still learning the lingo.
Yeah, of course. So here's the thing. Electron, it is very much a Microsoft product at this point, because GitHub developed it, and I don't know if anyone heard, but Microsoft purchased GitHub, right? So at this point, technically, Electron is a Microsoft project. But because it's all open source, we can see if they sneak anything in there they shouldn't. So I'm not too paranoid, and hopefully the developers at Microsoft that don't make Windows will work on it. Well, I mean, technically Electron is work done by the GitHub team, so technically that shouldn't be a problem. But I'm just saying, I don't like the Windows team. I mean, have you used Windows lately? I just installed Windows 10 the other day, and it crashed with me in about 20 minutes. Fresh install, 20 minutes is how long it took.
Be behind.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? 20 minutes from boot up, the machine crashed for the first time. So
that is very easy to imagine.
That's I gotta say, I've used Mac, I've used Linux, and I've used Windows over the years, and I gotta say, out of all three, Windows is the very far least stable. Linux has its issues, Mac OS has its issue. I'm not saying they're perfect, but the thing is, in comparison to Windows, they're perfect systems in comparison. They're not really perfect, but it's all about what you're comparing it to, and at the end of the day, Windows is just a dumpster fire. It's just a dumpster fire, folks. I'm sorry. It's a dumpster fire. I used Windows the longest of any operating system, and boy, can I tell you it's a dumpster fire. But yeah, so I'm not really sure what else I would say for the future as far as Linux goes and open source. I mean, I think it's going to get more popular as companies, realize just how powerful of a platform Linux is, and open source is as a code structure. So I definitely think things are going to get better in that area. But I mean, really, other than just saying things are going to keep going in the direction they've been going pretty much, I don't really have any other predictions right now. Billy, any predictions that you have that you'd like to tell the people at home?
Not much. I got about the same as you. I got no predictions.
No predictions. I got you. I mean, yeah, this is pretty much all we're going to do this episode. So we may just end this episode a little early, unfortunately. I don't really know what else to say. But I'm touching on the Electron thing again, because that's kind of... I feel like this is the Electron episode. Maybe we'll just call it that. One thing I will say about Electron is it does use more RAM and stuff like that. It's not perfect. I mean, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, sometimes it just makes the most sense. So, unfortunately, it's kind of the hand we got dealt, if you will. Hopefully, Billy will be in studio next week, everybody. And hopefully next week, we will... Vincent's cold will be completely gone. And I will sound even better. So thanks, everybody, for listening to Open Source Tonight for January the 1st, 2020. Here's to a great decade, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. Billy, where can they find you throughout the week?
They can find me on Facebook.
Alrighty. Look him up, everybody. Billy Everso. Yeah, Billy Everso on Facebook. Thanks so much, Billy, for joining me today for Open Source Tonight. You can find me at vincentmaggard.com, Vincent Maggard on YouTube, and you can find me at vincentmaggard.com. Also, by the way, just a couple quick programming notes, both for my own personal stuff and, of course, Open Source Tonight. First programming note.
Well,
did I mention the Twitter? Yes, I did. Right now. I'm about to mention. Thanks.
You probably forgot that, didn't you?
Yep. Okay, yeah, you can find me at Twitter at Vincent Maggard, actually at. So I'm not that good of a Twitter user, but I'm trying to post daily, and, I try to do that with both Instagram and Twitter, kind of try to post kind of often. So you can follow me at Vincent Maggard Media. That's the media account, but that's pretty much all I post on, so go check out that. Vincent Maggard Media on Instagram, at Vincent Maggard on Twitter, at Vincent Maggard on YouTube. Now, a couple programming notes. First, YouTube programming notes, particularly for my personal channel, folks. If you're subscribed over there, I want to go and check it out. Okay, so a couple weeks behind on new video releases because I'm sick. My apologies. Between some technical difficulties and then being sick, there has been some delays. So my apologies. We'll be getting some new content out. My hope is by the end of the week on that channel. Want to be doing a channel status update video on there very soon. We've got some announcements that will be coming out on that channel. So if you want to hear some cool new things that are in the works and different stuff, please go check out that video. Also, unfortunately, due to some issues with scheduling and some other things, I don't know if anyone's heard yet, but we did not get to publish the video because we haven't been able to record it with Billy installing Linux on his machine. That has been delayed. Additionally, the video where I install Linux on my friend Joey's machine and then send it to him, unfortunately, that video was a dumpster fire because I recorded the whole thing, got everything all ready to go, and there was no audio on any of the takes. I recorded the wrong audio source into my recorder, so we got silence instead of good crystal clear audio of me talking. And honestly, I was so far behind on trying to get it out to him, and it was about Christmas. I made the decision to not re-record. So, again, my apologies, folks. My sincerest apologies, but that video will not be going out because, again, I don't have anything to really publish. As far as for the video of installing Linux on Joey's machine, or not Joey's machine, Billy's machine. We've been doing some research. It looks like his machine's kind of flaky on Linux. We're not even sure it's going to be able to do it. Hopefully the next time when he comes over, we're going to check it out and try and test it out on a live CD of Linux Mint, a live USB key, I should say, these days. And hopefully we'll be able to get him over there. But if not, we may have some more delays in that particular project. But anyway, that's your programming notes. So thanks, everybody, so much for listening to Open Source Tonight. Really greatly appreciate you. Do want to thank everybody for tuning in during the whole last year. It was a really good year for the show. We got some listeners pretty quickly. The show, it's not got a large base, but I notice a lot of people are tuning in every week, analytic-wise. So thank you, everybody, so much for supporting the show, through all of our, blunders and technical difficulties and things trying to get this podcast off the ground. It's very much appreciated. And until next week, you're listening to Open Source Tonight. I'm Vincent with Billy Everso. Thanks so much for listening, everybody.